Greetings, my friends. I was asked to give a little bit of teaching on a subject that is exciting to me, and I was just looking into the, as the disciples often discuss, they said, who's the greatest in the kingdom? And I thought, well, that's good to know, who's the greatest in the kingdom. And they weren't talking about Jesus or their Father, they were talking among themselves, who's the greatest in the kingdom. And so we'll get into that just a bit. My name is Claire Stauffer. I work with a ministry called Refreshing Leaders. We started way back in the early 80s, and it has been a long road. But, it's quite interesting. Working with leadership teams and working a lot of times when things didn't go the way people thought they should go, we come to find out that the question often revolves around, or the problem revolves around, who's the greatest? Isn't that interesting? And so as I was looking at it, and just going over what the disciples ask, in Mark 9:33-35, it says, it's titled, Who's the Greatest? And verse 33 says, And they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, Jesus asked them, What were you discussing on the way? But they kept silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who is the greatest. And he sat down and called the 12, and he said to them, If anyone would be first, he must be last and be the servant of all. Well, that's not the answer they were looking for, I'm quite sure, as they were discussing among themselves who's the greatest. It wasn't who has served the best. It's like, who's going to be in a position to be served? Because that's what they always think about when they're thinking about who's great and who's not great. Who's being served, who's the server, and who's the one being served. Another one, in Matthew 18:1-4. Again, who's the greatest? At that time the disciples were saying, Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And calling to him a child, he put in the midst of them and said, Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom. So that's not even about being the greatest, that's about whether you're even going to get in. And he said, Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Wow. Humble yourself like a child. That doesn't mean to get into childish things. That means to be humbled like a child. And again, Jesus said, overall, the greatest is a servant of all. Humble yourself like a child, be the servant of all, and you'll be very great in the kingdom. And so many people, they don't like that. And listen, why is it so difficult to serve well? In the Refreshing Leaders Ministry, we've been called many, many times when things are in great disarray and no one wants to serve anyone. Everybody's upset with everyone else. And listen to this here. Inevitably, the story goes a little like this. Well, I can't serve under him or under her because, and the list is long. They don't appreciate my work. Or I get no respect. Or I just can't serve here anymore because of the mistakes they made. Or there's no way I can honor them after what they did to my friends or my family or my associates. Or I gave the best years of my life to this guy, and with this turn of events, I just can't stay. Does any of this sound familiar? Or do you know what he did to me? All kinds of things come up. And so I would just want to look at the lives of a couple of servants that I would say they did well. And listen, think about this. Think about this. This first servant I want to talk about, a young lady we find working for a commander of the highest position in the armed forces. That sounds like a good place to serve, yeah? And there's one huge problem. This commander is the commander of the enemy forces. Wow. So she's working for the commander of the enemy forces. The second one I want to talk about, a young man who is now old. I mean, he grew up in this position. He served for years and years and years. And he literally had millions of dollars escape his grasp in a direct consequence to his serving the man he served. Millions of dollars. Looked like they're coming, and they went. Because of who he served and what happened within the family that he served. How about that? Well, I just can't serve him anymore because I gave him the best years of my life, and look what happened. Does this sound familiar? Another servant. In his honored position, he was personal friends with the king. He heard the word of the Lord on many occasions. He saw signs, wonders, and miracles. He said, wow, that's the servant I like that. That's the servant I like to be. It sounds pretty good, eh? And then there's a fourth one. This guy was kidnapped and barely escaped with his life and still ended up in a federal prison. 4 servants we want to talk about. And I think these 4 servants, we can come back and address many of these issues. They don't appreciate my work. I get no respect around here. I just can't serve anymore because of the mistakes they made. I can't work for that guy because of what he did in the past. There's no way I can honor them because of what they did to my friends, to my family, to my associates. I gave them the best years of my life. But with this turn of events, how can I stay? Do you know what he did to me? So if we look at these things and we start to understand, there's a whole lot going on when people are serving, and there's a whole lot of reasons that you can jump ship or bail out or say, well, I'm just not serving there anymore. Well, my question is, were you called to serve there? Say, was I called? Yeah. Were you called to serve in that position? With the Refreshing Leaders, I know for a fact that we were called to Refreshing Leaders, because I guarantee you, if we weren't called, we'd have jumped ship years ago. It hasn't been just, wow, what a place to be. You can run with the leaders, and you can just, you can have enjoyable times and big parties and just be with the top guys in the church. And yeah, that sounds exciting. And along the lines, I've got to climb mountains, I've got to fly airplanes, I've got to sail boats, and it all sounds exciting. But what about when you're sailing a boat with a group of leaders on the things that just exploded at their church? Everybody's having a difficult time. Everybody's pointing fingers at everybody else. And you're there to try to bring just trying to bring things back into order and allow the Lord to do some healing in that house. It becomes really difficult. So as we look at these servants, let's specifically look at the young lady that I talked about first. This young lady working for a commander of the highest position in the armed forces with one huge problem. He was the enemy commander. I want to read you a little bit out of the Word. 2 Kings 5. Naaman, the commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and in high favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. Now the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, as he would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went and told his lord, the king, "Thus and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel." And the king of Syria said, "Well, now go, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." You see, they kind of missed the point. They wanted to be politically correct. And so the king wants to send a letter to the king. They totally missed the point. They're supposed to go see the prophet. And so he brought the letter. No, wait a minute. He said, so he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 changes of clothing, and he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent you Naaman, my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy." Wow. And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to kill and make alive, that this man sends me to cure the man of leprosy? Only consider and see, he's trying to start a quarrel with me." But when Elisha, the man of God, heard the king of Israel had torn his clothes and sent the king away, torn his clothes, he sent to the king saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and his chariots, and he stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him. Elisha sent a messenger to him. Elisha didn't come out himself. That's not politically correct, you see. And so it's interesting. Elisha sent a messenger to him and said, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean." But Naaman was angry and went away, saying, "Behold, I thought he would surely come out to me, stand and call upon the name of his Lord, and wave his hand, and I would be clean from leprosy." You see, so many times when we need something, we have real strong expectations about how it's going to come. And if it doesn't come that way, we get all upset. That's what happened. It didn't come that way, and he got all upset. He said, "I thought he would surely come to me, stand and call upon the name of the Lord, and wave his hand over the place and cure the leprosy." And he didn't do that. He says, "Are not the rivers back home better than these rivers?" And so on. And he went away in a huff. So he's blowing smoke, he's leaving. What's happening? His miracle is back there in Israel, and he's leaving all upset because the man of God didn't do it like he wanted him to do it. Wow. You think he had some things that he needed to pick up on and learn? Now the interesting part is we're talking about how this thing went and how things were coming together. Now, why did he go and see the king of Israel to start with? Because of that little servant girl, right? So he went to see the king of Israel because of the servant girl. The servant girl said, "If you'll go see the prophet," not the king of Israel, he said, "the prophet would heal you." And so finally he gets to the prophet's place, but see, he's trying to do everything according to protocol. He got sent by his king to that king. That king's completely freaking out. He says, "I can't heal anybody." And the prophet hears about it, says, "Send him to the prophet. He will know there's a prophet in Israel." And so he sends him to the prophet. Now the prophet sends a servant out to talk to him. Well, that annoyed him. That's not in order. You know, so many times we will serve if things are in order. You see, Naaman was a servant of his king. And he was a mighty man of valor, and he did things in order because that's how the king wanted him. Now the king sent him to the other king because that was in order. Now going to the prophet, that wasn't in order. I mean, who's the prophet? Well, the prophet's the one you can talk to and you'll get healed. That's what the girl said to start with. But he completely missed the point. So finally gets to the prophet, and the servant of the prophet comes out to chat with him. Well, that annoyed him big time. The servant of the prophet comes out to chat. I mean, what's up with that? And so along these lines, let's continue just a bit. He says, "Aren't there better rivers in Damascus I could wash?" And he turned away and he went in a rage. Verse 13, his servants came to him and said, listen, all these servants are involved here. Now I want you to notice that these servants play a critical part in what's happening. And sometimes when we serve, we don't think we're playing a critical part. We think it's only the man or the woman or the ones that are in charge that are making all these things happen. Listen to this story. The servants, every place we turn, we see servants playing a critical part in this here story. And so this servant said to him, he actually said you could wash and be clean. And another version talks about, said, "Hey, you're a great man of valor. If he'd asked you to do a great thing, you'd go do it because you're a mighty man." He said, yeah, Naaman could agree with that. But then he says, "He asked you just for a small thing. Go wash in the river. Maybe give it a try." You know, you got to be real careful and you got to be very diplomatic when you bring something to someone's attention who is a high commander like this and you're the servant. You know, it's you got to be, I would just say, diplomatic. You got to do it in a serving kind of way. Not in a demanding way. Not, "Hey, dude, you're doing it wrong." That's the wrong answer. But so he came, he talked to him, and he says, "You know, the man of God said, you wash and be clean." And so Naaman went and he dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child. He was clean. The leprosy was gone. Wow, how cool is that? And so, why was he there? Because of a little servant girl. Let's talk a little about the servant girl. Do you know what the word says? If we go all the way back here, it just says very briefly what was said. He says that he was a mighty man, he was in high favor with the king, It says the Syrians on one of their raids carried off a little girl from Israel. Wow. Study that out a little bit. You come to find out the Syrians were attacking the outskirts, the villages. And they would go in, and as history would tell us, they would attack a village. They would basically take everything they wanted from the village, and then they'd burn the place down. They would kill the men, the women, the children, unless they found one specific. Yeah, this one could be useful. They'd haul them off with them. Wow. So this little servant girl very likely had her village burned, had her parents killed, her brothers and sisters were killed, the neighbor kids she played with were killed, and she, and maybe one or two others, were hauled off to a foreign country to work for the guy who did it. Wow, now that's a little rough. We go back to the question, well, I can't work for this person because they did so and so and so. I can't work for that person because look what they did, and so on. What was her job? Well, as a servant of his wife, most likely her job was clean the floors, prepare some food, do the dishes. What'd she do the next day? Clean some floors, prepare the food, do the dishes. What did she do the next week? Clean the floors, prepare food, do the dishes. You know, serving. Serving sometimes isn't so exciting. And one day she noticed, you know, her master, Naaman, the one who did all these terrible things, had leprosy. Well, leprosy kills. You know, a lot of servants would say, he had it coming to him. God is bringing retribution. He destroyed my family. Now he's being destroyed in a slow way. God is going to get him. But she didn't do that. She served well. If she wouldn't have served well, her words wouldn't have meant a thing when she said, hey, you need to go so-and-so. Well, so what? She's not worth anything around the house. Why would I do anything she says? Very apparently, she served well. And what'd she do? She washed the floors. She prepared the food. She did the dishes. She's serving around the house. She's doing all the stuff nobody else wanted to do. And the next day she's washing the floors, and then she's doing the dishes, and then she's washing the floors, and then she's doing the dishes. And it just goes on and on and on and on. And now what you think about is extremely important. You know, the word says what you meditate on is what you become, basically, and that's my translation, but you study it out. What you put in is what's going to come out. She wasn't meditating every day on how evil he was. She wasn't thinking back every afternoon, oh, wow, it sure would be good to be back in my village. She wasn't saying, man, you know, I have no place to escape to. This guy destroyed my home, destroyed my friends, destroyed my family. What an evil man. She wasn't meditating on that. I know she wasn't. It doesn't say it in the word, but if she was meditating in that way, she wouldn't have told the man how to get healed. She said, if this man would meet the prophet could heal him. Does that look like she's serving well? That's a little rougher than most of us have it. A lot of us said, well, I can't because, I can't because, I can't because. And so she gave the key, the answer from her God to this foreign leader of the army who was attacking Israel regularly. So if you'll do this, the Lord will heal you. Wow, that's an amazing servant. The heart of this young lady is astounding. And so as we go on, we find out he came, he got upset with this because the servant told him to go. The king was all upset and said, this isn't working. So he ends up at Elisha's house, and the servant came out and told him how to get healed. So he's going back home in a huff. What's he going back home to? He's going back home to die. Because the leprosy is traveling with him. His miracle there was to wash in the Jordan, yes? But no, he couldn't do that because, you know, the servant told him. He expected the man of God to say, hey, man, great man, Mr. Naaman, you know, you're a mighty man. Let me just be the man of God here and wave my hand over the spot and now the leprosy's gone. That's how it's supposed to work. Well, that wasn't how it's supposed to work, not this time. And so you see the servant, the servant, the servant. And as we continue to look at these different servants, it's amazing how things come together or don't come together because of what's on the inside of those who serve. It's not about what happened to them. It's about what do you carry as a servant? Are you meditating on the evil that was done? Are you meditating on your family having been destroyed? Are you meditating on your place being burnt down? Are you meditating on this guy treated me terrible, now I'm supposed to treat him good? You know, I mean, what are you meditating on? What are you thinking about? So as we continue on, let's read just a little bit further on this story. And so he took all this money along with him. He stopped at Elisha's door. He said, he got the word to go wash in the Jordan. And of course he was all upset. But when he washed, he ended up being clean. Now listen to this. Listen. He returned to the man of God. Verse 15, still 2 Kings chapter 5. And he says, he and all his company, and he came and stood before him, and he said, behold, there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. Wow, this guy here just proclaiming God is God. That was the whole issue there. I mean, who they served. He says, so now accept this present or these gifts from your servant. Naaman's calling himself the servant to Elisha. Do you see this? Accept these gifts from your servant. As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will receive none, says Elisha. And he urged him to take it. Naaman urged him. He said, please take it, please. I'm your servant. This stuff I brought along for you. Elisha said, no. He said, no, I won't take it. And he said, I will receive none. And Naaman urged him, but he refused. Then Naaman said, if not, if you won't take it, please let there be given to your servant 2 mule loads of earth. For from now on your servant will not offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any god but the Lord. Wow! Do you see what the little servant girl told him the truth. And the truth traveled that deep and made such a difference in this man's life. The commander of the enemy army now says, God is God. I will serve the Lord. I won't make a sacrifice to any god except the God of Israel. And so he wanted 2 mule loads of earth or dirt to take along back. Well, that's not too hard to do. And then he also asked for a pardon. Because, see, he has to go into the God of his king when he gets back. His king, as he says, leaning on his arm, and they would bow down to this foreign God. And he says, please, that I would be pardoned when I do that, because God is God, and I don't serve this other God anymore. I serve the true God. And Elisha said to him, go in peace. It is well. Naaman had barely gone from him just a short distance, and Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, here's the servant, he said, see, my master has spared this Naaman of Syria, not accepting from his hand what he brought. See, Gehazi was looking at the stuff, and he wasn't looking at his God. Because, see, they had just went through some rough stuff. If you'll study back through, Gehazi got to see all kinds of things. He saw the school of the prophets being that short on food that they're collecting food surrounding, and they ended up putting something in the pot they shouldn't have, and the food was poisonous. And he saw, Elisha put some things in the pot there, and the food was good to eat, and they all ate. But it's like lean times. It's not like you just got a whole bunch of vegetables, you make up your food. They're out there scratching, trying to make it for the school of the prophets. Gehazi saw when, the gift of the tithe came to the school of the prophets, a little, as they called it, a knapsack, or I would call it a day pack, with a couple of items from a tithe as some food that was sent from a tithe to the school of the prophets. And he's thinking, well, this isn't enough to eat. And yet, Elisha blessed it, and they ate, and they were all filled. He saw all of these things, and he's saying, wow, it's been a little rough. They had just come through hard times. In fact, if you look, apparently this was right around the time when Elisha told the woman, you remember the woman that had the child, that Elisha used to stop at her house every time he came through town. And when he stopped at her house, she would give him food and a place to stay, and they were so excited about the man of God, so they decided they would make him a room on the roof. And so they made him a room on the roof, and Elisha and Gehazi are there, and they're, because of Gehazi is his right-hand man, he's the servant of Elisha, and they're staying there, and Elisha says to Gehazi, he said, what can we do to bless this lady? And Gehazi gets the word from the Lord, says, she has no son. Elisha says, well, call her in. And he says, you're going to have a son. And she says, don't do this to me. I can't have children. He says, you will. And she did. And interesting enough, Gehazi saw this, and he's a part of this, and he's speaking into this thing. And he sees all these amazing things happening by God. And then he sees also, a couple of years later, the son dies. And this lady comes to see Elisha, and Gehazi is trying to protect Elisha because she's kind of freaking out a little bit. And Elisha says, let her come to me. The Lord hasn't shown me what the problem is, but, let her come. And she says, did I ask for a son? Now, it's interesting, and all of a sudden it's the man of God's problem, yeah? She gets a son. It's a miracle from God. Now the son has an aneurysm or something. Something happened in his head, according to the word. And she says to him, did I ask you for a son? And Elisha sends Gehazi on ahead. He says, you go lay my staff on the boy, on the dead boy. And he did, and nothing happened. Elisha showed up. You remember the story that he was miraculously raised from the dead? I mean, amazing things. Gehazi's seeing all these things. And see, my point is, Gehazi saw the hard times. Gehazi saw the miracles. And then what happened? Elisha comes to the lady and he says, listen, there's going to be some famine. You and your family leave town for a while. And they left town for, I believe, 7 years. After 7 years out of town, they come back, and interesting enough, they come to the king to see if they could get their land back because they were gone for that long of a time. When they come into the king, who's there? Gehazi is with the king as a friend of the king. And the king just asked him, he said, hey, he said, read some of the stuff that Elisha did. And the king's looking for a boost. He's looking to think about the things of God. He's looking to get the right stuff on the inside, get his mind in the right place. Tell me about some things that Elisha did. And so Gehazi is telling him about this lady that couldn't have children. And the word of the Lord came, and she had a child. And years later, the child died. And the child died and was raised again to life. And the king said, wow. And in walks the lady, and Gehazi said, and that's the lady. And the king said, are you the one? She says, I am. He said, what can I do for you? She said, I came to see if I could get my land back. He said, well, not only do you get your land back, whoever was taking care of it and raising crops on the 7 years you were gone, they need to pay all that back to you. Even if it was a little bit, you still get paid for it. And I said, look at these miraculous things happening. And Gehazi's right in the middle of it. And I believe he's being lined up to be Elisha's successor. Because he's seeing it, he's walking it, he's understanding this pretty well. But now he's looking back at all the difficult times. He's looking back when they didn't have enough. He's looking to all, and he's thinking, there goes an amazing amount of money headed for the border. We could at least have a little backup plan if we run into these hard times again and there's this famine and so on. We could at least buy some vegetables instead of rooting around and finding stuff and throwing something in the pot that's poisonous. And he's thinking all the wrong things. So having heard the word of the Lord, I will receive nothing, he went after Naaman and said, excuse me, pardon me. And Naaman says, everything all right? He said, yeah, everything's all right, but we just received 2 prophets from sons of the prophets came into town, and we need a change of clothing for each of them and maybe 1 of your talents of silver for each of them. And Naaman said, hey, no problem. He gave him the changes of clothing. Do you know where the clothing was? The clothing was gathered together as a gift to the king of Israel. You remember that. It wasn't a gift for Elisha, and it wasn't a gift for the servant. It was a gift for the king. Do you know that a kingly outfit would cost well over a year's wages? Wow. And a talent of gold is 75 pounds? And so he just received 2 kingly outfits. That's 2 years' wages. And Naaman doubled the gift. He asked him for a talent. Let's see here. It says, he asked for some silver for each of them and for a change of clothes. And Naaman says, be pleased to accept 2 talents. And he urged him and tied up 2 talents of silver in bags and 2 changes of clothing and laid them on his servants, and they carried them back for Gehazi. Gehazi couldn't carry it. That's 150 pounds of silver. And 2 complete kingly garments. So he had 150 pounds of silver and 2 years' wages of clothing. Wow. And so Gehazi said, all is well. You know, I don't really need it for myself. I don't need it right now, but I can lay it up in case we come on hard times. There'll be a pair of clothing there for Elisha to wear. He should wear kingly clothing. There'll be a pair of clothing there that I can wear. We can dress like a king. And with the 150 pounds of silver, 2 talents of silver, we'll be able to feed the entire school of the prophet. You see how shifty things come when you look at it in a wrong kind of way? First he heard the word of the Lord, no, that's not for us. But then he thought about the hard times and said, we actually need it. And then he took it into his own hands and he lied about somebody coming, but now all is well. 2 changes of clothing, 2 kingly outfits, and 150 pounds of silver. I'll just stack that in my house. When hard times come, Elisha will be so glad when I pull that out and just give him what it takes to put things back together. And so that's just a quick look at the young girl and at a couple of servants along the way. And we'll pick up with this on the next session. But I want you to think about these things. What was in their heart? What did they meditate on? And why are they doing what they do? The young girl, her heart was very pure. And she didn't meditate on all the evil that happened to her, or she could never tell her master how to get healed. Then the young servant running with them, he cared very much about his master. He got him to turn around and go wash. Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, he was looking on the wrong things. He was thinking about the difficult times they had gone through. And he's storing up for the future, not realizing that God could cover them no matter what happened. Amen? So think about those things. We'll pick that up on the next session. Thank you.